All right, let me welcome you this morning to our monthly webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about unleashing the power of the PMBOK guide, the 7th edition. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to deal with this particular topic, and it looks like there's a lot of people wanted to get some additional information on this, is because we came out with a new PMBOK. PMI, Project Management Institute, has rolled out PMBOK 7. And so if you've not seen it, you'll see a copy of it in just a second here. If you're a member of PMI, you can get an electronic copy of this downloaded from the site. And so all you have to do is just go sign into your account, and it will give you an option to be able to download PMBOK 7. One of the things that has changed that many of you already know about is that PMBOK has normally been one of the main drivers in your PMP certification. And so all the way up until PMBOK 5, it contained most, or if not almost all of your PMP certification. In PMBOK 6, you'll remember that PMI started talking about changing and bringing in other resources. And so PMBOK 7 is not like any of the other PMBOKs. If you've not looked at it, it's not like it at all. The PMP test changed in January of 2021. It now has multiple resources. It's no longer driven by a PMBOK. And so that has changed the entire nature of the PMP test. PMBOK 7 is totally different than the other PMBOKs as well. The last PMBOK, PMBOK 6, was right at 800 pages. This is about 270 pages. So it's much more streamlined than anything else. Now, this is what the PMBOK 7 looks like. And so if you go to Amazon to purchase it, it's going to be right around $100 for you. And so it's 7th edition PMBOK. And so this is what they've rolled out. It's more of a handbook. If you think of it like more from that aspect, that's going to be a better positioning for you. It's more of a handbook of how to do projects. It's thought of as something that would sit on your desk, something that you'd pull, that you'd skim for different things. PMBOK 6 is very much process driven, as you'll see here. All right, so here's some of the changes as we kind of walk through this. And so PMI has moved from 5 process groups and 10 knowledge areas, which all the other PMBOK 6 was all about, to now what they're doing is what they call 12 project management principles, and then they have 8 performance domains. So all of these sub plans that we have are much more minimized in the new PMBOK 7. And so this shifted from what was called a process-based standard to a principles-based standard. And that's why your PMBOK is going to look so different to you. Because in the old PMBOK, everything was a process. So you had a plan for each process, you followed the process. And of course, you remember, as we've talked about it before in class, is that in PMBOK, it was pretty much a command and control type of setup. This PMBOK is much more blended. It's going to introduce hybrid and agile in a much stronger way because all of that's out in the marketplace right now. So these performance domains represent a project management system of interaction, interrelated, interdependent management capabilities that work in unison to achieve desired project outcomes. So it's shifting from a process-driven to more of a principle-driven, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So other additions emphasize the how of project management instead of the what and the why. This is going to emphasize more of the what and the why, and this would allow this PMBOK to be able to be used by anybody on the team, not just so much by the project managers, because you're looking at the what and the why, and that's going to help everyone be able to understand this. It also emphasizes this idea of behaviors. What kind of behaviors need to be demonstrated in working on this project? Now, let me give you just an example that they gave in the book. Through a principles-centered approach, when a change comes along the project team will view it with a whole system mindset instead of just the performance domain in which it has occurred. And so when the old process mindset, it would go through all of your change requests and all your sign-offs and all of your documentation, but you'd be looking at it really from the main standpoint of what this change is going to do, just to cost, just to time, and some of those things. Now it's going to be looking at what does this do to the value that the customer has or wants, because that change order is going to be looked at a much bigger thing. Also, with this in mind, using PMBOK 7 would be emphasized more so for any team member to be able to look at this and understand it, because you're looking at principles of project management rather than just the process. Another added section in PMBOK is what they're calling calling models, methods, and artifacts. And so it's high-level description of frequently used models, methods, and artifacts. And artifacts are going to be the documents that you have created for the purpose of documentation for that project or for some that your organization has required to be filled out. And so it's not an exhaustive list. It's more of a guide, very much of a loose guide as compared to real detailed processes as it was before. Now, this chart right here gives you a good comparison of PMBOK 6 and then moving into 7. If you look over on the PMBOK 6 side, on the orange side, you'll notice that you've got your knowledge areas. Each of those knowledge areas, as you already know, are processes. And each of those processes had a plan because that was quality knowledge area. You had a quality plan. You had communication knowledge area. You had a communication plan. Now what they've done is they've moved over here to the right side, the purple side, and what you'll see is they've got project management principles. And so they've got stewardship, team, stakeholders. We're going to skim those very loosely here this morning. Tailoring, quality, complexity, risk, adaptability, resilience, change. And so where you might have a plan for some of these are principles to consider in working and putting your plan together. And then when they talk about performance domains, this is where they come into the stakeholders, teams, development approach, such as what is the life cycle and such as hybrid, agile, and so forth. And then you've also got tailoring and then models and methods, as well as planning, project work, delivery, management, and uncertainty. And we're going to talk about each of those as well. So the emphasis is going to be a little bit different. It's a little bit lighter on the content than any of the other PMBOKs that you've looked at before. So let's talk about the 12 principles for a moment. The principles serve as a foundational guideline for strategy, decision-making, and problem solving. And so the principles guide the behavior of the people involved in the project. And so they've gotten real big on this emphasis of behavior, how we act in the project. So the first principle that they talk about is be diligent, respectful, and a caring steward. And of course, PMI has always emphasized that. Most of your organizations emphasize this as well, and people do. They try to be very respectful. But what they're focusing on is this term steward. Stewards act responsibly to carry out the activities with integrity, care, and trustworthiness. And so we do what we say we're going to do. We act right. This actually also emphasizes the code of conduct that PMI has listed on their website that so many people have referred to. A second principle is creating a collaborative project team environment. You'll notice they've used the word collaborative here. They're wanting the engagement of the team. Many projects that we've served on absolutely have this. The reason why they're emphasizing this more is because they've got hybrid and they've got agile coming into this particular PMBOK. And so the teams are made up of individuals who have diverse skills, knowledge, and experience. PMI has always emphasized that. But one of the bigger pieces here, I think, is that collaboration. In other words, I'm not just a project manager making and calling all the shots. I'm part of the team, even though I might have the role of project manager. In principle 3, this is effectively engaging the stakeholders. Now, you did this in PMBOK 6, and of course, you're continuing to do this because you need the stakeholders to be engaged throughout the project. And so they influence the project, and project teams serve other stakeholders by engaging them and keeping them engaged throughout the project. And what PMI is emphasizing here is that proactive value delivery. And so what they're doing is not just keeping them involved because you want them to make decisions, but you're keeping them involved so that you make sure that you're providing value to that stakeholder, the same value that they really desire. And then in principle number 4, this is focusing on value. This is probably one of the strongest areas that they have beefed up. We've always talked about value normally in a business case, return on investment, benefits, those type of things. Here, they've actually built it in as a mainline principle. Value is the indicator of project success. It can be seen throughout the project, at the end of the project, or after the project's done. Value can be defined in quantitative or qualitative terms. And so this issue of value is going to be a huge deal, but you're going to really see this when they start talking about the agile side or the hybrid and the agile side, because you're trying to deliver value at a faster pace. Then principle number 5 focuses on recognize, evaluate, and respond to system interactions. And so this is where they're really talking about the internal governing system of a project. So they say a project's a system of interdependent interacting domains of activity. Systems thinking entails taking a holistic view, and then systems are constantly changing, requiring consistent attention. So here they're looking at a little bit more of a macro view of projects, and all of us have to deal with this in the real world as well, to where you're constantly finding yourself having to make adjustments in order to be able to make your project fit with what the organization is today. And of course, yesterday it might have fit, but your organization, I'm sure, is evolving like all the others. Then in principle number 6, demonstrate leadership behaviors. This emphasis, they did it in 6, where they talked about moving from management to leadership, but this is even more of an emphasis, because what they're wanting to do is get project managers not to be such a manager, as more of a leader, so that the team is making more of those decisions. So you're demonstrating leadership behaviors. Effective leadership promotes project success, contributes to positive project outcomes. Any project team member can demonstrate leadership behaviors. And so this is where you're really trying to emphasize the elevation of the team to where they're making more decisions, or they're looked at as a subject matter expert on that team. Then principle number 7, tailor based on context. Now, PMI has always very loosely throughout PMBOK talked about adjusting the process to where it fits the culture and fits the project. Here, they've just flat out moved into mainstream with it, to just talk about that we need to be adjusting these things to be able to guarantee project success. So tailor based on context. Each project's unique project success is based on adapting to the unique context, and then tailoring the approach is iterative and is a continuing process throughout the project. Now, they've introduced that term iterative, which you're going to see over on the agile side, because once again, this PMBOK is going to be driving all the methodologies of traditional waterfall and hybrid, as well as adaptive, which is going to be on the agile side. This is also emphasizing what they've done to the PMP test that you probably are very much aware of. In 2021, when they made the change to the PMP test, about 50% of the PMP now talks about agile principles or agile framework on that test. And so they've lined now the PMBOK to where it's supporting what they've just done on the PMP test. Principle number 8, build quality into processes and deliverables. Now, we would look at this pretty much as a quality plan, and it has all those components. But the big focus here is that maintaining a focus on quality, it produces deliverables that meet project objectives, aligned to the needs, uses, acceptance requirements set forth by relevant stakeholders. And so here, the emphasis is not a person or a small part of the team emphasizing quality. It's every individual on that team who has that responsibility. Then number 9 is navigate complexity. PMI has focused a little bit more in the direction that there's going to be conflict, there's going to be complexity with your project. Our project normally influence has a ripple effect on so many different things. And so what happens is that they've brought it back to where we're going to have to learn how to deal with some of that conflict and that complexity of the organization. So here's how they position it. Complexity is the result of human behavior, system interaction, uncertainty, ambiguity. And boy, we all have that, in the real world. And then they said, continually evaluate project complexity so that approaches and plans enable the project team to successfully navigate the project lifecycle. And we find that based on what's happening internally within our organization, the culture, and if we didn't have enough things influencing it, we have all of the pressures right now with what's happening with our economy, and so that's going to influence many of these things. Then principle number 10 is optimize risk responses. They've emphasized risk in all the PMBOKs. In this particular case, they're emphasizing risk from the aspect of you're trying to optimize it. In other words, get the most positive things out of these opportunities that you can on the risk side. So they say continually evaluate exposure to risk to maximize positive impacts, minimize negative, and risk can be positive or negative, just like we've seen before. So opportunities and threats are going to be there. We also have principle number 11, embracing adaptability and resilience. Adaptability is the ability to respond to changing conditions. Now, the emphasis or position of the PMBOK right now is that we are in a very in changing conditions. And so we have to find ourselves adjusting, whether it's changing the personnel within the organization or the culture, or just having to look at projects differently. And then resiliency is the ability to absorb impact and to recover quickly from a setback or failure. And so how do we get it back, get that project going again? How do we turn things back around? And so this mindset has to be there because we find ourselves with not enough staff, not enough resources, very limited crew a lot of times, and then yet we're trying to make that project adapt when we run across a hiccup with it in order to be able to keep it going or get it going in the right direction. And then the 12th principle that they've listed in PMBOK 7 is enable change to achieve the envisioned future state. Now, I want you to notice that the statement on change here is not just a change order that a lot of times we're used to with waterfall. This is a change, understanding that projects drive change. And PMI has gone to this and talked about this in a lot of their other PMBOKs, but the point is what they basically have said in the past is been real strong on change orders because it was so command and control with PMBOK. But this is understanding that we have a much bigger picture of change. Our project's going to influence change for some group or somebody at that organization. So they said a structured approach to change helps individuals, groups, and the organization transition from the current to the future state. And that current to the future state is very much mainline change management theory. Cotter in his book, as he talks about change, and if you look at any book on change management for an organization, you're going from the current state to the future state, and that's exactly what they're quoting here. So it can originate from internal influences, and one of those internal influences it's talking about is your project, or external sources, stakeholders engagement, motivational approaches assist in change adoption. So they've looked at change as much more of a macro area there. Now, the other thing that they have also changed and adjusted a little bit is that they have brought in what they call performance domains. So a project performance domain is a group of related activities that are critical for effective delivery of project outcomes. Project performance domains are interactive, interrelated, interdependent areas of focus that work in unison to achieve desired project outcomes. So let's look at some of the domains that they've talked about. So there's 8 main project performance domains. And so they've talked about stakeholder, team, development approach and life cycle, planning, project work, delivery, measurement, and uncertainty. And of course, you can see how many of these have similarities, obviously, to other PMBOKs for sure, but let's look a little deeper here. So let's start with the first one, the stakeholder performance domain. In the stakeholder performance domain, it addresses activities and functions associated with stakeholders. The results would be a productive working relationship with the stakeholder and stakeholder agreement with project objectives. Now, we've always been encouraged in previous PMBOKs to have a stakeholder engagement plan where you engage the stakeholder periodically in your project. Here, they're wanting it to be a strong working relationship. So it's actually a step beyond engagement because that working relationship would be with that stakeholder really throughout the duration of that project. The stakeholder, you remember, is an individual, group, or organization that is involved in the project. And of course, stakeholder analysis, we've used this for years, where you systematically gather, analyze quantitative, qualitative information to determine whose interests need to be considered. And so, in other words, just because everybody involved in the project is a stakeholder, but all stakeholders are not equal. There's certain people that you're having to make sure that you provide the value or provide the requirements that they're wanting. And so in their domain for stakeholder, they take stakeholder engagement and they basically walk it through these steps of we have to identify the stakeholder, understand and analyze them, prioritize them, engage them, and monitor them. And so you'll notice where in other stakeholder analysis, we've identified them and analyzed them, but here we are actually the step of prioritizing is a stronger emphasis and thinking about how we're going to engage and monitor that engagement throughout the project, which will help. A second type of domain that comes up is called team performance. So this addresses activities and functions associated with people who are responsible for producing project deliverables. The results of this is shared ownership. Now, this term shared ownership is a bigger deal in this PMBOK because especially when you get over on the agile side, the agile team or the adaptive team is going to be making more and more decisions. So that shared ownership is shared ownership between the project manager and the team in allowing them to make decisions as well. High-performing team leadership skills demonstrated by all team members. So it's not just the project manager driving the project. You've got team members who are demonstrating leadership skills who are driving it as well. So several different groups of people can be part of the team performance domain. One is the project manager, which we would expect. So a person assigned by the performing organization lead the project team responsible for achieving the project objectives. They've brought the term the project management team, which is going to be more of your executive management, members of the project team who are directly involved in project management activities. And that sounds very low level kind of stuff, but it's not. When they talk about project management activities, they're talking about all the funding, the culture, all of those type of things. So this is going to be more like executive management. And then your project team would be a set of individuals performing the work on the project. These are your worker bees. You're going to have these people working on the project continuously. They've also listed project manager behaviors. These would be behaviors that a project manager would possess, but they would also coach other people on: transparency, respect, positive discourse, support, courage, and then celebrating success. So all of these would be key management behaviors that they would demonstrate and they would pass on to their team. And one of the things about the project manager too, that's a much softer kind of approach, is that this person is not really driving the project as much in this PMBOK, even though they do a few places. But when you start talking about hybrid and you start talking about adaptive, which is your agile side, the project manager is not doing so much of it. They're more supportive. They're more in that line of servant leader. Now, high-performing project team behaviors. They should have open communication, shared understanding, shared ownership, trust, collaboration, adaptability, resilience, empowerment, recognition. So they've given clear behaviors to the team, and these behaviors would be something that we would be able to work with the team on or coach the team in being able to build these behaviors. The next domain that they talk about is the development approach and life cycle performance domain. So in their development approaches, a development approach is the means used to create and evolve the product, service, or result during the project life cycle. So in this PMBOK, they have talked about 3 different development approaches: predictive, adaptive, and hybrid. And so as they're looking at these, they're giving credence to all 3 of these because these seem to be what's happening in the real world right now. Predictive has always been there. That's traditional waterfall. But and adaptive is more going to fall into your agile type of projects, which are happening in Scrum, Kanban, and all of those types. But hybrid, you have an organization that's not really ready for agile or Scrum, and it can't really do waterfall because that's not really working. And that's where that hybrid's coming in. And so hybrid is one of those things that people are starting to experiment with like crazy. So as you look at development approaches, on the left-hand side, you'll notice that that's predictive. Predictive, you're very familiar with. Most organizations have used some form of it. But then as you start looking and moving towards the right, hybrid, you're using some predictive and some adaptive. And then adaptive, obviously, is going to be more like your agile type of life cycles, to where people are running Scrum, Kanban, or some type of agile to be able to run that project and deliver it to that customer in pieces. Now, the predictive approach that they're talking about is useful when the project and product requirements can be defined, collected, and analyzed at the start of the project. And so all of us who have run projects, traditional projects, we know we call it waterfall. That's a very common term, traditional project management, but that's one of the things that normally sets it apart. I can know the scope up front, not that you're not going to have change orders, you know what I'm talking about, but in general, we know the scope up front. We can deliver that scope at the end of the project, and we can know all the scope up front apart from change orders or some kind of crisis or whatever the case may be. So those fit predictive. That's the reason why construction projects normally are more predictive or traditional, because normally we know all of that up front. And so predictive is still going to be here. It's going to stay with project management. It's going to stay with us in certain projects. They're going to fit predictive. They're going to fit it perfectly because you know it all up front. The thing is as you look at predictive, this is where you get the term waterfall. And so you can go through and take it through each of the various stages. And when you get down here to closing, you're going to be able then to turn around and hand that off to the customer. And so predictive is going to still be there for those projects that we know all of this information up front. The second one is going to be the hybrid approach. We've just written a program, a 2-day program on hybrid over the holidays, actually, and just finished it up. So we've got a 2-day on this, but it's a combination of adaptive and predictive. And so, in other words, we're not using all the predictive methodology or processes because that's going to be overkill. But at the same time, we can't be as loose as what Agile might be or Scrum might be. And so we're having to be somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of people attacking this method like crazy. And the point is that part of it is because it's new. Part of it is because it's very difficult to nail it down of what the processes are and what the steps would be, because every organization, the steps would be something a little bit different. So it's a combination of both. It's useful when there's a lot of uncertainty or risk around the requirements. It's useful when deliverables can be developed by different project teams and they're coming together. And so the point is hybrid is going to be here. I think you're going to see hybrid for the rest of your career because people are experimenting with this. I think it'll formalize a little bit. And people have different ideas of what hybrid is, but the point is that you're going to see people who they're not doing 100% agile and they're not doing 100% predictive, and so they're coming someplace in the middle for the success of the project. Now here, this is out of your PMBOK. Notice how they've got it in 3 different groups. And so you might actually have in hybrid here, you might actually have 3 different sub teams working on this. And so in other words, we plan, design, build, and then we've got another group, plan, design, building, that's feeding into that, and another group that's plan, design, build. And so you almost see an evolution of this. In other words, we might have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 is how this could be looked at. But the point is that this life cycle is being provided through incremental development. And so we've got that stage. Now we're going to the middle stage. Now we're going to the final stage with this. But your hybrid might not look like this at all. Your hybrid might be something totally different than this incremental development. And then the third type of approach is going to be the adaptive approach. And so it's useful when requirements are subject to a high level of uncertainty, likely to change throughout the project. And that's one of the reasons why people go to this, is because there's such a massive amount of change. And if you've got a contractor involved, which many of you do, if you've got them on a fixed price contract, they're going to charge you $1 gazillion for all those silly change orders. And so you're trying to come up with something that's going to be much more cost effective. So a clear vision is established at the start of the project, and the initial known requirements are refined, detailed, changed, or replaced as needed. And you use iterative and incremental approaches, which means we are working on this, but we know change is going to happen. We know we're going to have to make adjustments. We know that we don't know everything about this project. A lot of times with adaptive, the customer is driving it based on value, based on their requirements. And then, of course, if you're using something like Scrum, you're going to have a product owner who's representing the customer. And you'll have a Scrum Master, and that product owner is going to tell you what's the next slate of requirements that needs to be done in the next iteration. And so it really can be a very positive thing. The problem I think we're having right now, and you guys can kind of look at it in your environment, is that we want to be either agile or we want to be predictive, and yet none of our organizations are really there today. Our organizations have evolved to where predictive's not working right. You see that with a lot of projects behind. We have too many projects on the laps of people right now, and then we go to agile, and we don't have enough high-speed communication to get to everybody and quick enough, and we don't give the team enough authority on the agile side to make those decisions and run it as fast as they need to. So we've got dynamics on both of these that's kind of cumbersome. Not pointing blame, just kind of stating a fact that we've got struggles here. And so what happens is we end up in that hybrid mode. So in adaptive, this is where many of you would look at, and many of you who are working on Scrum or Agile would fit with this. Each iteration, you're delivering something to that customer. It's not perfect, but you are handing something off to that customer for them to be able to gain some value from it. And so this is absolutely used in a lot of your product and software development. And so it works very, very well in some of those cases. Now let's look at the planning performance domain. The purpose of planning is to proactively develop an approach to create the project deliverables. And this is where the struggle's coming a little bit with going with predictive compared to agile, because agile is much more loose. There is planning, but it's more iterative or per sprint. And then you've got predictive, where we try to plan the thing to death and make sure that nothing happens that we haven't fleshed out in some plan. And then many of our projects are somewhere in the middle. This is overkill, and this is not enough to get us going. So the purpose of planning is how much planning is right for this project. And so the project deliverables drive the outcomes the project was undertaken to achieve. The project progresses in an organized, coordinated, deliberate manner. Now, people would say predictive is a deliberate manner and it's organized. It could be, and it is in many cases. But once again, it might be overkill for your project. And then when you look at Agile or Scrum or one of those Agile type of frameworks, you might look at that and think, oh my gosh, this is not near enough. And you might be totally right about that. You need more than that, because you need more structure, because it is too loose. The other domain would be project work performance domain. This is associated with establishing the processes, performing the work to enable the project team to deliver the expected deliverables and outcomes. These processes are not set in stone as you read this PMBOK. As compared to other PMBOKs, those processes were pretty much locked in if you were going to use those. And so, in other words, you would select which processes, and then there was a details on how you were going to use these. Now, what you're looking at is what processes do we need? You want enough processes. You want enough processes so that you can turn around and you have the capability of being able to control the project, but you don't want so many processes that you feel like you're doing an unbelievable amount of paperwork in order to do some of this. Then delivery performance domain. This is where you're looking at being able to deliver it. And so as you look at delivery here, project delivery focuses on meeting requirements, scope, and quality expectations to produce expected deliverables. And so this is a little different focus, because you're looking once again through those value eyes. And so you'll see as you read PMBOK 7, it has a lot from the aspect of value. And then your measurement performance domain. Measurement involves assessing project performance, implementing appropriate responses to maintain optimal performance. Now, this, as you read this section, this is going to take you in the direction of what are we measuring and how are we reporting it back? Because you are communicating and reporting something back, you're trying desperately to be able to measure something that is going to be worthwhile when you're reporting it back. If we're on the traditional side, we're reporting something back from a CPI and an SPI standpoint. If we're reporting it from an agile side, you're doing it more from a burn down or burn up chart, or number of story points, or number of features, or something like that. And so sometimes those two types of measurements, there's a conflict there, especially when you're trying to do the hybrid, because we're running it in agile, but we're trying to report in traditional. And so those discussions would be part of what would have to happen in this particular domain here. Now, measures are used for multiple reasons. And so trying to decide what we're going to measure and what's going to bring value. So evaluating performance compared to a plan, tracking the utilization of resources, work completed, budget expended. We do some of those. Demonstrating accountability. And this accountability here is really focused on that team accountability that we're talking about. Providing information to stakeholders, ensuring the project deliverables meet customer acceptance criteria. And so once again, what are we measuring that's going to bring value to that customer and for this project as we go through each of these sections? This particular PMBOK has also introduced dashboards. Now, I know all you folks do dashboards probably to some extent. Nothing wrong with that. But PMBOK has not really been big on talking about dashboards. And so they've given credence to dashboards because dashboards can be low-tech, high visibility. And so they show large quantities of information on metrics, and the chart depicts the status. And this is one of the reasons why dashboards has become so popular on the Agile side in particular, is that people can walk by, glance at the board, and know exactly what's happening with that project. project. And so those of you who are using Kanban boards, then that's exactly what you're using. You're using a dashboard, or you're using a Kanban board as an information radiator to let people know what's happening. But then dashboards a lot of times have similar information when you're having that report to management. The thing I would say about dashboards is that dashboards, a lot of times people will do it numerically, and nothing wrong with that. But you're probably going to want to have a dashboard that's built around both. You have your numerical numbers there, and then you show your graphics of whatever those measurements are that management feels like they need, and keep that dashboard pretty standard. In other words, we always measure these same things. Our graphics all are the same for each of these meetings. And what that does, it allows you an opportunity for the person who needs all the data, then they see the data, but the person who's a graphical or the visual kind of person, they're going to see that dashboard, and they're going to spot that dashboard. I mean, think of how many times we've all sat in that meeting and somebody pass out a status report, and if we're using the RAG system of red, amber, and green, how many times have we all scanned that thing to find the yellow and red, and we do it just super quick to see what's going wrong with that project? Or we scan it for the greens, and we're happy about the greens because that's the way that's the way it's supposed to be, and we love that. But we'll scan it for those yellows and those reds to see what's going wrong here, and that's where our discussion is. And that's what your dashboard will do. It allows people to focus on what they need to focus on. And of course, we've all seen these things, so this is nothing new. But this is out of the PMBOK 7, and this is the first time they've done this. They've given you some other color codes with this of things being on hold, different things like this. And so this is not a bad dashboard either. But anyway, the point is, whatever dashboard fits your project and fits your organization and satisfies management for what they need to see, that's what you're looking for. Now, the Kanban boards I was referring to, and I even used the term information radiator. If that's new to you, that term's new to you, then that's very much on the Agile side. Agile uses what they call Kanban boards, and of course it's usually a non-electronic board. It doesn't have to be, but usually is, and it's high visibility, low tech, so people can see it and be able to know what's happening on the project. That's under the umbrella of what we would call information radiators, visible physical displays that provide information to the rest of the organization. And so information radiators is something that has really been driven over on the Agile side and over on the Scrum side in particular. And of course, what the purpose behind all this is so that people have the ability to know what's going on with the project or projects without having to pull up software or getting a report from somebody. Now, they also gave you an uncertainty performance domain, and uncertainty obviously fits into that risk world that we're very familiar with. And of course, even the verbiage here fits into that as well. Opportunities and threats make up the set of project risk. Options for responding: are we gathering information? Are we preparing for multiple outcomes? Are we investigating multiple designs or alternatives? Are we building in the ability to adapt and respond quickly to unexpected changes? All of this falls in under that umbrella and connection to risk. Why? Because you're looking at the opportunity and the uncertainty, and uncertainty is going to be those threats that you're talking about with risk as well. Ambiguity is another piece that they have emphasized in that same section: a state of being unclear, having difficulty in identifying the cause of events, having multiple options from which to choose. Solutions for exploration of ambiguity: progressive elaboration, experiments, prototypes. And we run into those situations to where the solution is not super clear. We've got people who've got different or opposing opinions sometimes. And so we're trying to flesh it out long enough and research it enough to see which is the best direction. But anyway, progressive elaboration, experiments, and prototypes they've introduced under ambiguity. Tailoring. This is probably one of the strongest times that they have really gone in the direction of customizing your approach to the project and to the organization. And so tailoring is the deliberate adaptation of the project management approach, governance, and process to make them more suitable for the given environment and the work at hand. And so this is would be almost like a brand new section for most of us, because they've talked about it in a few paragraphs in previous PMBOKs, but this is really a much stronger drive to align this. Now, this is the graphic that they gave on tailoring. And so you'll notice they talk about selecting initial development approach, then tailor it for that organization, and then tailor it for the project, and then implement ongoing improvement. And that's that continuous improvement component that PMI has really been trying to drive for about the last 10 years. And the last 4 years, they've been hitting it extremely hard to have that continuous improvement into this. This tailoring approach, though, is something that might be brand new to our organizations, because what we have normally done, and maybe your organization's different, okay? But what we have normally done is we have a process over here of how we run projects, and we make every project fit that box. And so that's how we run projects. And so if it's predictive or traditional, then every project is going to be put into that box, and that's how we run those. And good, bad, or indifferent, that's how we've done it. But what they're saying with the new PMBOK is, have you considered tailoring it? Tailoring it to what processes does that project need? What processes? What are we needing to measure about that project? And so this is where they've introduced tailoring to you. They've also introduced what they've called models, methods, and artifacts. So when they're talking about a model, it's a thinking strategy to explain a process, framework, or phenomenon. Now remember, you're tailoring it, so you're coming up with some of these models of the processes. And your step might not be in a book, okay? Your step, because your organization is the way it is, and you have certain type of accountability where that has to be, that project has to be accountable to certain levels in that organization. You might have, your model is probably going to be a little different. It'll have some similarities, but it'll be different than some of the others. Then notice method. This is the means for achieving an outcome, output, result, or project deliverable. And so your method will normally be your steps, probably. And then artifacts, which is a big term in PMBOK 7, a template, document, output, or project deliverable. And so your artifacts are talked about in several places in PMBOK 7. And of course, part of this, some of these artifacts will later be part of the documents that will actually go in to when you're going through your retrospective, your lessons learned, and you're going to archive some of these documents, and they'll call them, these documents, artifacts is what they will call them. So an artifact is looked at as a template, a document, an output, or a project deliverable. Project managers and project team members are expected to tailor the use of artifacts to meet the needs of the project. So listen to what was just said here. We talked about tailoring the processes and approaches for the project. Now, what have they done with the artifacts, which would be our templates and some of our deliverables and outputs? We would be tailoring it to that as well. So that issue of tailoring has become very, very strong. All right. So let me tell you about a couple of things that we have going, and we're coming. We have coming up towards the end of the year. So PMP Mastermind Group. Now, many of you have heard of the Mastermind Group. If you have not, we do a free PMP Mastermind Group, and so it lasts 5 days. And so it's not 5 full days. It's actually, it takes about an hour a day for people to do what they need to do in the mastermind group. But we introduce people to the PMP credential, filling out the application. We have some videos, some practice tests. We expose the people to PMP, some PMP type of questions so that they can kind of get an idea about the PMP exam. And so we do these free. And so we had, I think 8 the first time, 30 something the second time. I think we have over 100 people in our next mastermind group that's coming up in May 23rd to 27th. I think we have over 100 in that group right there. But here's a couple of things that we do in this group. It's free. It's 5 days of coaching.
¿Qué pasó?
And then what we do is that we have, it's free, it's 5 days of coaching. You get an automatic discount if you do decide to come to the boot camp from $2,450 down to $1,500. We also do a free scholarship drawing per class. And so one person in that class will get a free scholarship to be able to take their PMP and come to the boot camp for free. And so we have 2 more of those for the PMP. We have May, and then we also have September 12 through 16. And those will be the last 2 that we have for this year on the PMP boot camp, on the PMP Mastermind Group. And then our boot camps, we have 4 boot camps left. If you're looking at this, we have June 21 through 24, August 29 through September 1st, and October 24 through 27. And then we have December 5 through 8. And so these will be our last boot camps. Now, for those of you who have not done your PMP, the PMP credential has changed dramatically. with the changes in 2021. And of course, the material now comes from PMI, and so we order the material that PMI has put out. But for those of you who have been hesitant about taking your PMP, I don't think you need to think like that any longer. It seems to be more logical and more straightforward than ever before. They are still updating it a little bit, and they're going to be updating it again in this month, and so, or this quarter. And so I'm expecting it to actually get a little bit better, but the passing rates have actually gone up using their material than as compared before. And so for those of you who are kind of been on the fence, or you've heard all the horror stories about the PMP, it's totally different than it was before, but this PMP actually is much more logical and aligns with the material very, very well. So those are some things to consider. And so let me stop for just a second here, and I'll before we close, and I'll open it up for some questions here. So let me open this up. All right, so let's look at some questions, get some questions here. Any questions from anyone? All right, well, let me go ahead and close it out. Let me thank you so much for being here today and being on the call. And so I wish you well as you have a good week, and I'll see you next month. And so you guys have a good week, okay? Bye, everyone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being on the call. Have a good day. Bye now.
Thank you.